Okay, I think we're back now. I think I fixed that. Sorry about that, everybody. I think it was something on my end. My buffer was had filled up. Just waiting for Instagram to come online here. All right, we're back. Everybody, we are back. Um, let's see if there's a few comments here. Just trying to read these on TikTok. Yeah. Let's see. Filing period ends Thursday at 5, not Friday. Yes, that is correct. So the filing period does end on Thursday at 5. Sorry about that. Yes, you are correct there, Steve, who is running for Congress. Let's see what we have here. This is a great comment here. Kiki and the Cats talking about the process for getting a ballot initiative qualified for the ballot. She says they made it hard for a reason and now they have to deal with the process they set up. That is correct. That is correct. They had to, the legislature intentionally made it harder. They've taken several steps. In 2018, there were 3 ballot initiatives that qualified and passed. So they made it intentionally harder to get it on the ballot. And now they have to deal with those rules as they're trying to qualify their ballot initiative to repeal Prop 4, to put that up for a vote. There is a lot of interesting legislation that I'm looking at coming up for this session. And we can talk about it in a second. But let's get back to what the judge was talking about in the redistricting case, where she gave the legislature what they wanted, even though they had missed the deadlines. If you remember, in a footnote in her decision, Judge Gibson said that lawmakers filed their motion 29 days after her November 10th ruling that put the map in place that created the Democratic leaning district in Salt Lake County. Congressional District 1. They filed that appeal. They filed that motion 29 days. That was still within the window for them to appeal. They had a 30-day window, and they didn't do it. They also had a 21-day to appeal for an interlocutory appeal after both the August 25th and November 10th rulings, and they didn't do it. The legislature had plenty of time to appeal, and they did not do it. And she scolded them for that. But she still gave them what they want. Why? Because there are a lot of constitutional questions that need to be answered, and that can only be answered by the Utah Supreme Court. Now, legislative attorneys had claimed that they couldn't appeal because the court needed to issue a final judgment first, but they had 2 faster paths that didn't require the court permission, and they didn't take them. But in an answer to that, legislative attorneys said the legal team would, quote, that would have resulted in the parties simultaneously briefing likelihood of success of review in the appellate courts while conducting remedial proceedings before her court, thereby unnecessarily complicating the proceedings and wasting judicial and party resources. So they were saying they didn't want to be arguing this in 2 different courts. Gibson didn't buy that. She was not buying it at all, if you read her opinion. She writes, in other words, it would have been a lot of work in both courts. While that may be true, this statement reveals that the legislative defendants were aware of these avenues to an immediate appeal, but they chose not to take them. So again, the legislature could have appealed this, could have appealed the rulings twice, and they didn't do it. And so now they had to force her to do something that was highly improper, which was declaring part of this case over. The legislative lawyers had argued that the case was effectively over because Gibson had already granted the relief that the plaintiffs wanted. And so they were asking her to declare the entire case finished so they could go to the Utah Supreme Court. But she refused. She says there are more than 20 issues that remain unresolved, including some new challenges that were added after the legislature passed Map C in November, and they passed HB 1011 from Senator Brady Brammer, which altered the way that Prop 4 works. And so they need to litigate those things. But in the end, she agreed to certify specific portions of her August ruling. And that was the ruling that threw out the congressional map. And that the legislature then put Prop 4 back in place as the law in Utah. She agreed to declare certain parts of that final. She said that the lawmakers unconstitutionally repealed Prop 4, that issue's final, that the 2021 congressional map is permanently blocked, that's final, and that Prop 4 is the law in Utah. Those three issues are final. That is what the legislature can appeal to the Utah Supreme Court. As she writes, quite literally, this court is between the proverbial rock and a hard spot. This entire case is not final. Count 5 is not final, but the court agrees that the important legal issues decided by this court should be reviewed by the Utah Supreme Court as quickly as possible. She says, until there is a final decision on these legal issues from our Supreme Court, there will be a cloud on Utah's congressional elections and an open question regarding the power of the legislature and the power of the people. These legal questions should be put to rest as soon as possible. There is no reason to delay the Utah Supreme Court's review. There is no reason to delay bringing some finality on these important issues to the people of Utah. But she did not mince words when in her decision, repeatedly pointing out that the legislature had all these tools available to them and they didn't use them when it was appropriate. She wrote, quote, "This was not an easy call. The legislative defendants had a direct, non-discretionary right to immediately and directly appeal to the Utah Supreme Court. They chose not to do that. No legitimate reason was offered for failing to appeal. Now they're seeking a third imperfect avenue, requesting the court certify its August 25th, 2025 ruling and order as final to allow them to appeal under Utah law." And then she basically, at the end of her opinion, left it up to the Supreme Court. She says, this court leaves it to the Utah Supreme Court to determine if, as a matter of law, this suffices to establish appellate jurisdiction. So that's where that stands. It's going to the Utah Supreme Court. The legislature is appealing. They had all sorts of opportunity to appeal, and they just didn't do it. Let's see. Skitch Hodson on Instagram says, "I'm so sick and tired of being sick and tired of GOP games." Well, you know, I can see what you're saying, but I also agree with the judge that there are some really important constitutional issues, and we've talked about this before, but there are some really important constitutional issues that need to be decided here. Because although Prop 4 is the law in Utah, the Utah Constitution specifically says that it's the legislature's job to draw political maps. Now, there are some time constraints. It says after the census, that's when they have to do it by, also in the Constitution. And the Constitution overrides any law. But there's also the issue in the Constitution that says all political power flows from the people and that the people have the right to reform their government. And so this is something that the Utah Supreme Court is going to have to decide real quick, because we've got the filing dates for Congress coming up on March 9th. Now, I'm sure the legislature, if they wanted to, they could find a way to push back that filing period again and push back they're running up against a whole bunch of problems, because April 25th is when the Republican and Democratic state conventions are. That's when your congressional nominations will be decided. And then you've got the primary election on June 23rd, I believe. So they're running up against time. They're not really able to push it much after that. So now it's in the Utah Supreme Court's lap, and it is going to it is a very weighty issue that they have to decide in a very short manner. We're coming to the end here, but if anybody has any questions, any comments, anything they'd like to talk about before we finish, I really appreciate everybody logging on tonight. This is fun. I always enjoy doing this. I didn't do it over the holidays. As I said, I wasn't feeling the best, but would love to hear what do you have to say. Elliot Nutter says, happy January 6th. Yes, happy Insurrection Day to all who celebrate. As I was writing my story about how Senator Mike Lee has not sufficiently answered all of the questions about his involvement in January 6th, it just brought back all of those emotions from that day. It was such a horrible day watching that on television as it happened. And as I noted in my story, I was actually texting with Senator Lee while he was on the floor of the Senate after the rioters had left, after everything had been locked down and the chaos was over. I was texting with him. He told me that the White House, President Trump, called his phone as this whole thing was going down, mistakenly dialed his phone looking for Tommy Tuberville. I wrote that story. Now, there's some things he told me in those texts that were off the record I cannot share. Some things he told me about that day that it's off the record. I cannot share them, and I will not share them publicly, as I note in the story. But that story was cited in the January 6th final report. Actually, two stories I wrote about Senator Lee were cited in the January 6th committee's final report. And as I said earlier, if you want to watch the video of Senator Mike Lee literally running from me because he didn't want to answer questions about his leaked text messages, you can go to, you see it on my TikTok, you can see it on Instagram, and it's on my website, utahpolitics.news. It's also on YouTube. On YouTube, Max Reed says, any predictions on net gains or losses for total seats for the parties in the legislature? We're going to have to wait and see once filing is over on Thursday. Sorry about that, Steve. We're going to have to wait and see, and then I can start to dig into it. There's really, the legislature, there's not a lot of competitive seats in the legislature. As I said earlier, I'll be really interested to see if Rosemary Lesser gets a challenger in HD 10. Jill Kofor didn't want any of that this third rematch with Lesser. So I would say the Lesser is the favorite there, but it's still a Republican district. It's really tight. It was that race, the 2024 race between Democrat Rosemary Lesser and Republican Jill Kofor was the most expensive race in the state that year. So we'll have to see how that shakes out. I think that there are some incumbents who could lose. As I said before, President Stuart Adams knows he's in for a fight. He's already got 3 challengers. That does not happen unless people sniff some sort of vulnerability, and he's had his problems. So I wonder about that. But he's got a tough election bid. I think Ken Ivory's got a tough election bid coming up. I think that the Forward Party's going to have a really hard time hanging onto that seat in SD 11 because there's a lot of heavy-hitter Republicans who want that seat. So we'll have to see how it works out. Nathan Detroit asked, do you think Curtis, he's talking about Senator John Curtis, might back the Democratic resolution to stop further military action in Venezuela? I really don't know. I do have to reach out to him about that and ask him about that, and I plan to. But I don't know. You saw that Blake Moore was against, he came out against military action in Greenland. Easiest call in the world to say, no, we are not going to have military action in Greenland. But what happened in Venezuela was illegal, okay? It was illegal by international law. It violated the sovereignty of another country. President Trump did not have constitutional authority to do that. No matter what Senator Mike Lee says, the Constitution does not give the president the authority to use the military to back a law enforcement action in another country. It's not there. But it didn't take, I mean, after it first happened, Senator Mike Lee was skeptical. It took him about 3 hours after Trump jerked his chain to get back in line and say that, oh, it's just fine. It's not. But, you know, Congress has the authority to stop this at any time. I don't know if they're going to do it. I doubt they will. But they have the authority to do that. And now we've got saber rattling against Cuba, Honduras, Cuba, Colombia, Greenland. And make no mistake, if the Greenland, that I did not think that the prelude to World War III would be the United States taking Greenland. That was not on my bingo card, but I think you have to take those threats seriously. That would certainly be the end of NATO. Certainly. Or certainly be the end of the United States involvement in NATO, which is pretty much the end of NATO. So that's what I'm going to be doom scrolling about over the next few days. Let's see what we have here. Steve Merrill says, any rumor on which GOP U.S. House incumbent will run in which district, especially if any will run in Senate district, in Congressional District 1? This is what I think is going to happen if the current maps stay in place, okay? If the current map, which has that Democratic-leaning district in Salt Lake County, and I know that there are Republicans who are like, no, it's a gerrymandered Democratic district. No, it's not. It is a Democratic-leaning district. It is still majority Republican. 35% of the voters in that district are Republicans. Democrats are the third largest voting bloc, at about 24%. Now, that's probably because you have a bunch of Republicans and independents who would vote for a Democrat. So that's why a Democrat would be favored in that race. But if that current map stays in place, I think Burgess Owens is going to retire. I'm getting indications that some of the people surrounding him are talking with him about retiring. He does not want to retire. He obviously loves Donald Trump. He wants to continue serving in the House with Donald Trump as the president. But I do think that he will retire if that map stays in place. So who gets into that race? Again, as I mentioned before, I think Dan McKay is going to get in that race, which is one of the reasons why I think that Representative Doug Fiafia is running for the U.S. Senate or for the Utah Senate against Dan McKay, because if that map stays in place, I really doubt that McKay remains on the ballot for Utah State Senate. But if he does step down, I think you're going to see a lot of Republicans get in that race. A lot of moderate Republicans. Now, I'm not saying McKay's a moderate Republican. He's pretty conservative. But I think you're going to see a lot of Republicans get in that race because it's an open seat in Congress. Yeah, they'll be at a disadvantage, but don't think that it's a Democratic lock. It's not. It is not, as I've explained many, many times. You cannot run a Bernie Sanders Democrat in that district and win. The math just does not support that. Because You can't win with just Democratic votes. You have to get independents and some Republicans to vote for you. That's just the math. That's always been the math for Democrats in the state. It's just easier here. Instead of running in districts where you have 50% Republican voters, now it's down to 35%. So the hill they have to climb to build a winning coalition is not as steep, but they still have to build a winning coalition. So anyway, let's see. Nathan Detroit says, you mean they can't just pack a few magic FBI windbreakers and attack any sovereign nation they want? Yeah. Maybe they've been playing way too much Risk. I'm not a foreign policy expert, but it just feels like there's no actual strategy behind all of this. It's just done on a whim. You saw the blanket fort situation room that they put together in the Mar-a-Lago ballroom. As people have pointed out, there are mobile skiffs, which is basically a Faraday cage. You do it in the middle of the Mar-a-Lago ballroom, there are windows, you can surveil electronic signals through windows. That was far from secure. You can't just throw up some blankets or sheets and say this is a secure area. It doesn't work like that. Elliot Nutter points out on TikTok, Mike Lee hates NATO. Oh yeah, he's been pushing for the United States to leave NATO for years, the last couple of years. You'll also remember he has spent time on Twitter. Remember when he was threatening the Prime Minister of Japan? That was a fun time because there was that U.S. Navy man who got involved in an automobile accident in Japan and killed some people and was in jail, and Mike Lee was demanding his release, and he was threatening the Prime Minister of Japan. That was super fun when that was happening. Exactly the kind of behavior you want from your elected officials. Let's see. Question on TikTok. This is Yusuf who says, what are your thoughts on Donald Trump taking Venezuela and wants to take Greenland next? Well, we were talking about that, and again, I am not a foreign policy expert, but I do trust certain voices on foreign policy. What happened in Venezuela was illegal by international law. It was unconstitutional. You can't do it. But I guess the philosophy is who's going to stop it, right? Congress could end this. Venezuela was always going to be easy. It's not a huge victory to capture Maduro in Venezuela. Venezuela is a failing narco state, a failing police state. Yeah, of course it was easy. But what comes after is hard. President Trump says we're going to run the country. Nation building is difficult, and you can't do it without boots on the ground. He's trying to get oil companies to go in and rebuild the infrastructure, and then he wants to reimburse them. You would think that would take congressional approval, but it just seems like they're doing whatever they want. And now they're rattling sabers against Colombia and Cuba and Greenland. The thing is, when you do regime change, and it really wasn't even regime change, the Maduro regime is still there. They just got Maduro out. Everything else in the regime is still there. So it's not really regime change. What did it accomplish other than they just got Maduro out of the country and killed 80 people in the process? The rest of that administration is still there. The rest of the Maduro regime is still there. So what it does is it creates chaos. There's chaos here. And chaos leads to instability, and instability is a problem. And if you listen to the experts on foreign policy, the United States doing this to a sovereign nation damages our standing in the world, damages our reputation among our allies. They don't know if they can trust us. And maybe you'll start to see some countries start to cozy up to China or Russia because they don't feel like they can trust the United States anymore. At least that's what I'm reading about this. But I don't know. Elliot Nutter. Oh, he brings up this. Oh, man, thank you for bringing this up, Elliot. He says, what do you think of Nick Shirley suddenly being the new Mormon conservative hero? Nick Shirley's a grifter. He didn't uncover anything. He's just trying to get attention. He's done this before. If you remember, he went to Ukraine and walked around and was astonished that there were people trying to live their normal lives in Kyiv while this war was going on, and suggesting that the war wasn't happening. And when he got called out on it, he said, "Oh, it was just satire. It wasn't very good satire." But he's done this before, and then he starts posting conspiracy theories that the Hortmans, the lawmakers in Minnesota who were murdered last year, that they were killed because they were looking into this fraud. Spoiler alert, this fraud was being looked into since 2019. Okay? People have gone to jail for this already. He didn't do anything new, but it's confirmation bias. It's a kind of story that conservatives wanted to hear. And they love themselves, people pretending to be journalists and doing these sensationalistic videos with zero context. But that's also, I think, it also highlights a problem in our news infrastructure because people don't trust mainstream news sources anymore. There are two different realities in this country, probably several, where people believe the facts they want to believe. There's no established set of facts, as the Trump administration called it, alternative facts. But that's where we are, and it's a problem. And the bigger problem is this story has been debunked like 20 times over, right? But that doesn't matter because the people who hear it the first time have already made up their mind, and they're not going to hear the retractions. And the people who watch Fox News all day, all they're going to hear is this thing about Somalian daycares. They're never going to hear that the actual mastermind of this whole thing was a white woman who's gone to jail. They're not going to hear that, because it feeds into their pre-existing biases. And now, I don't know if you've seen this on social media, but there is a daycare, I believe in West Valley, that has a name that sounds Arabic. And now you're seeing a lot of this, the usual suspects on Utah's right wing starting to get all worked up about this daycare, claiming that it takes state funds. How do they know? They don't know. They don't know, but they're just making stuff up because it makes sense to them. Nick Shirley's a fraud. He makes stuff up. And people who are inclined to believe that stuff are going to take him very seriously. I don't, because he has zero credibility and zero track. His track record speaks for itself. This is what he does. So hopefully that will answer your question. All right. Anybody else have anything? I've been talking for an hour and a half here. I appreciate your time and your attention. Thank you so much for listening. If you want more, you can go to my website, utahpolitics.news. Read all my journalism there. Sign up for my newsletter. I have a podcast called Special Session with Brian Schott. I'll put this live stream out as a podcast. I'll edit it down and put it out, so if you miss any part of it, you can listen to it tomorrow or the next day. I do subscriber-only live streams. I've got one coming up later this week. That's for you, Nathan, because I know Nathan Detroit likes those. He's one of our subscribers. But anyway, you can do all that. You can support my work as an independent journalist. My website is journalist-owned, journalist-operated. No corporations, no billionaires telling me what I can and can't write. And if you value that, if that's important to you, if that's something you want to support, you can go take a minute and go to my website, utahpolitics.news. Anyway, welcome to 2026. It's going to get crazy. We've got the legislature coming up, candidate filing period. I'll keep my tracker up to date. I'll write about some interesting races. I'll write about some interesting legislation. There's a lot of stuff to pay attention to. It's going to be a crazy 45 days, everybody. Anyway, thank you so much for listening tonight. Thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it. Hope you have a great night, and we will talk to you later.